Hi everyone! We have just gotten our first look at the Warhammer The Old World rules. Even though it's just more of a teaser than an actual look, we do get some things, and I'd like to take you along to the Warhammer community website and to my thoughts on these rules. This is basically my first impression. I read through the article, of course, before recording this video. But this is just going to be sort of speculation on the fly. So yeah, I hope you like this. Let me know what you think of this in the comments, and also what your own expectations are going to be for the old world. Here is the article. This is what we have gotten so far. This is the Old World Almanac, your first look at the rules. They say the old world is nearing release early 2024, nothing that we didn't know yet. February has been mentioned, but that post has been removed again, though not before somebody took a screenshot. So it might be February, it might be that they need a little bit more time and that will be a bit later or even a bit sooner. But we are going to get a ramp up of old world articles, what they promise here at the end of this article. So what we have here is, we start with this picture, High Elves versus Goblins, Goblin Wolf Riders. The style is, I think, very reminiscent of a bit of 8th edition artwork. I'm not sure if this is actual things that they had in 8th edition. If it is, and if they do continue this, then well, I wasn't a big fan of the 8th edition art. I didn't like how, for example, here you see with this chainmail, scale mail shirt, skirt here that the elf has, how it's a little bit defined and then it very quickly fades out to broad strokes. It's not a style that really appeals to me. I like much better the style that we will see a little bit further down, a picture from the 6th edition rulebook. Might have even been older, but I think it first appeared in the 6th edition rulebook of a vomiting troll. So what we have here is the turn sequence, the game structure. That's what this article is about. The game is divided into 4 phases. You start with the strategy phase, then the movement phase, shooting, and then combat. As has been mentioned before, there is no magic phase. Magic is still an integral part of the game, but it has been spread out over the phases. So what you get during this strategy phase, this is the one that will be focused on in this article, and the rest will come in later articles at a later date. The strategy phase is when you do your start of turn things, what used to be the start of turn phase. And well, some other things as well, because one of the things we read here is rallying is now part of the strategy phase. In the movement phase, you declare charges, then you move the chargers, then compulsory moves, and finally remaining moves and conveyance spells. Conveyance is a new type of spell that, from what I can glean from this article, it has to do with movement. I believe Hand of Gork is mentioned further down. Shooting phase, the active player shoots with the units armed with missile weapons, then the war machines, and then attempt to cast magic missile and magical vortex spells. So that's your offensive magic. And then in the combat phase, you fight in hand-to-hand combat and you cast assailment spells. Units that have lost combat may be driven back or become broken and flee. At the end of this phase, once all combats have been resolved, the active player's turn ends. And then you go to the other one. The game is divided into a number of rounds. What used to be called turns is now called rounds. Each round consists of 2 turns, one for each player. And each turn is broken down into 4 main phases, the ones we just discussed here. And then each of those is broken down into 4 sub-phases. The strategy phase, look, here's that picture of the trolls that I was talking about. This is one of the most iconic pieces of artwork, for me at least, in the 6th edition book. That's the book that I started with. When I saw this picture, I believe I've been staring at this for about half an hour the first time I saw it, just to see what was going on, all the details, all the little bones in there, and Really evocative, really thought-provoking piece of artwork. So this is much more my style, but it might just be that this is the edition that I grew up with. So strategy phase, what you do, why we have a picture of the trolls here, because stupidity tests are taken at this juncture, and they say it's also when Night Goblins fanatics are placed on the table. Now, I'm not sure yet how this is going to work, because this is basically all the information we have on Night Goblin fanatics. It used to be, of course, that if you, during a movement phase, whether it was your own movement phase or the opponent's movement phase, as soon as any unit moved to within 8 inches of the Night Goblins with the fanatics, movement would stop, the fanatics would come out, they would do their thing, and then movement could resume. Having this at the start of the movement phase might mean that the fanatics trigger as soon as something is within 8 inches at the start of the turn. And if that is the case, then that would mean that you could have a unit of cavalry charge your Night Goblins and have them stay there for a round of combat. And then the next turn the fanatics come out and they crush all of those knights that were trying to get through your ranks of Night Goblins. Might be that this is how it works, and if so, that would make fanatics probably a lot more useful, or maybe a lot less, as Night Goblins are also very prone to breaking and fleeing, especially when charged by a unit of knights. Other things you can do here is check victory conditions if the scenario calls for that. And then we get to the second sub-phase command. Characters' special rules fire off. Now, I don't know if this is to mean that every character, just like in Age of Sigmar, will have its own special rules. That's one of the things I disliked about Age of Sigmar. I played it once or twice, and one of the things that I didn't like was that every unit and every character had its own special rules, and it required a lot of having to keep track of what was going on and what was going to activate when. So if that's the case, then that would definitely be a negative point for me for this edition. But what we see here, for an example, is an enchanted item. So here we have a Bretonnia Lord, and he has the Falcon Horn of Frediment. And the Falcon Horn says that if you are not in combat, you may attempt to use the Falcon Horn by making a leadership test. And if the test is passed, then until the start of your next start of turn sub-phase, enemy units cannot use their flying special rule. Another thing we see here is the way that this is worded. Enemy units cannot use the Fly X special rule. This is very reminiscent of how it was worded in 8th edition, which was the edition where your rules and terminology got a lot more defined than it was in previous editions. Especially in the Warhammer editions, terminology could very easily have multiple meanings or multiple words being used for the same thing. Here it is in 8th edition, if you see the Fly X, that means that you have a creature that can fly, and X is the number of inches that it can fly during its turn. Then we get to what I mentioned earlier, the conveyance spell, Hand of Mork or Gork. And since this is all bold, I guess that this is just the name of the spell, the Hand of Mork or Gork. It is a conveyance spell, and that means that it's cast in the movement phase. And we have other spells, such as this one, the enchantment spell, that is cast in, what was it, I believe, in the, was it also the movement phase? Oh no, that was the start of turn phase. Yeah, enchantment and hex spells is in the strategy phase. I should get my terminology right. Just complaining about how terms could mean different things, and then I do the exact same thing. So right. So conjuration is the third step of the strategy phase. This is when you cast your enchantment spells and or hexes. So enchantments is basically what was an augment spell in 8th edition, and a hex is still called a hex. Players take it in turn during this step to choose wizards who aren't fleeing to attempt to cast spells. Tomb Kings, for instance, might choose to cast this spell here below. and it has a casting value. They say they'll go into more detail. I think this is basically what you need to roll on 2d6. If the casting value is anything like what it is in Mordheim. And since it says that players take turn to attempt to cast spells, there's nothing here about dispelling. So I guess it's just make your casting value and then you make the spell. And if you don't make the spell. There's no dispelling. Probably barring items like Dispel Scrolls. And then the final step is rally fleeing troops. This used to be part of the movement phase. You make a rally test, choose a unit, roll 2 dice against its leadership, and if you fail, you continue to flee. If you pass, you're allowed to move a free reform move and return to the fray. That's basically just what it was. And then one more thing, we have more on morale later. But if a unit is under half strength, it gets a -1 modifier to its leadership when attempting to rally. That's a good one to notice. And under 25%, you need a natural double 1. That, I believe, was also in 8th edition. Maybe not worded this way, but in 8th edition it was that a double 1 would always pass any leadership test. And before that it was if you are under 25%, you will just continue to flee and you are unable to rally. But then 8th edition came along and they say, well, you can still try because your natural double 1, your natural snake eyes will still rally, and that has happened in games that I've participated in, so great to roll those. There's a lot more things that we have to expect, but for now this is going to be it. Another piece of artwork here, Orcs versus Humans. I don't think I recognize this one. I must say that I'm not familiar with, of course, all the art in all the army books, but this might be something that's probably also in some 6th or 7th edition army book or rule book. It's just not one of the pieces of artworks that I recognize. So, here we have it, the Old World update. I will, of course, come back when more news is released about the Old World. What they say here is that we will get a lot more in the coming months. We'll get the rest of the phases, rules for magic, morale, psychology, and other matters, taking a close look at the factions, the settings, the models, etc. So I think that they will definitely going to amp up the frequency with which these articles are being released. And that is something that means, well, Forces of Fantasy will have a lot more of these news videos to keep you updated. That is going to be it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Like the video if you like the video. You can also subscribe to the channel. At the time of recording, we're at over 100 subscribers. I'm very happy with that. Please also check out the Forces of Fantasy podcast. You can find us at forcesoffantasy.com or listen to the podcast on any podcast hosting platform. And if you want to know more about the podcast, want some exclusives and behind the scenes stuff, you can take a look at our Patreon. The Forces of Fantasy Patreon is non-tiered, meaning that you can join for as little or as much each month. And your contributions will help me produce more content like this. So if you like this video and other stuff like it, please consider joining the Patreon. And well, according to the ones that have joined, according to my patrons, it is going to be worth your while. Thanks once again for watching, and I will see you in the next video, maybe even with the next Old World Almanac update, or whatever they're going to call this.